We're just 42 days or exactly 6 weeks away from the 2020 presidential election. And today also happens to be National Voter Registration Day. Since 2012, the nonpartisan civic holiday has been observed every fourth Tuesday of September. The idea is to educate eligible voters about what they need to do to make sure their vote is counted in November. Now, this comes as many Americans are beginning to cast their ballots with the help of early voting. For more on National Voter Registration Day, let's bring in CBSN political reporter, Caitlin Huey-Burns. Good to see you, Caitlin.
Hi, good morning, Bud.
All right, so you know that registration in the past has typically been a grassroots door-to-door operation. How has the pandemic affected both parties, partisan groups and nonpartisan groups, their efforts to get the vote out?
That's right. At this point in a traditional campaign, you would be getting lots of knocks on your door, but we're in a pandemic still, and lots of campaigns and outside groups don't feel comfortable with that, and they shouldn't be doing that. Instead, they are really trying to focus their grassroots get out the vote and voter registration efforts online, finding people where they are, which is at their homes and by their phones. And so you're going to see a lot of social media focused on getting out the vote. An interesting thing that I've started to notice is this, and others have reported, is this idea of kind of social media influencers focusing on voter registration. So you're going to see a lot of Instagram ads, but also people that you follow on Instagram or social media really plugging voter registration. But what's different about this cycle as well, in addition to kind of the non-traditional efforts, is that a lot of the focus from the campaigns and outside groups are focused on not only getting out to vote, but also how to vote. Because we're in a pandemic, and a lot of these states, as we've talked about before, are expanding vote by mail operations, expanding early voting, trying to figure out ways to give people more access to the vote, given that it's a pandemic. You're going to see a lot of focus on voter education. And so that's when I talk to secretaries of state and election officials and campaigns, that's what they're really focusing on. Not just getting out the vote, but making sure voters know how they can vote, how they can get their ballot in safely to make sure it counts. And lucky for our audience, we have a great resource on cbsnews.com. If you go to cbsnews.com/vote, you can find your state, how to vote in your state, what all of the deadlines are for registration and returning a ballot. Everything you need to know is right there. So that's a great resource for people wondering how to make their ballot count.
CHB doing the heavy lifting. You should be right here at my side anchoring this show. But let me ask you also about the correlation between high voter registration and higher election turnout. And I've noticed, just like you did, I think, Caitlin, when early voting happened in Fairfax, Virginia, we saw these huge lines, and I remember just looking at the screen and saying, wow, this is, I don't think I've ever seen lines this early in the process. What do you make of all that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Vlad. There are a few different things. First, I find it really interesting when I'm talking to voters. You would assume that a lot of people want to vote by mail, and that's true. We've seen in the primaries, especially in states like Pennsylvania, just an overwhelming number of people voting by mail for the first time. So states are certainly preparing for that. But another thing they have to prepare for is this idea that people still want to go in person. I've talked to people of all ages, young college students, as well as people my parents' age, who say that they just feel more comfortable actually going in person and making sure their ballot is counted there. Some people say, it's just part of a tradition of going to the polls and kind of making it a tradition. And some college students that I've talked to who are recent grads have said that there's so much information out there that they're just not sure voting by mail is something that they want to do. So that's why you're going to see still a lot of people vote in person. So the scene in Virginia, I think, was really important because that speaks to enthusiasm, and that's something that Democrats have been talking about. But does it necessarily continue on through these next 6 weeks? That's the big question. We know that Democrats are more likely, that we've seen, to request absentee ballots and to vote early. Republicans tend to vote in person on election day. So we shouldn't take too much away from it, but I think there is this big question about what resources these states have to make voting safe and secure, knowing that people are still going to want to vote in person.
And let's talk about those who choose to mail their ballots in. States have differing rules on this, and you can even track your ballot in some cases. Are states going to be counting the mail-in ballots before Election Day? And what can people do if a problem is identified with their ballot?
It's such a great question, Vlad. There are several states that do not allow the opening of the ballot until Election Day, and some states don't even let you start processing those ballots until all the polls have closed. And why does that matter? Well, we've been talking about how there's going to be an influx in mail-in absentee ballots, and these states have to kind of scale up their operations. Well, if you have to open up the ballot and just get it ready for processing, that takes a lot of time. And in key states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, you're not allowed to start processing those ballots until Election Day. And officials that we've talked to say that that takes a lot of time, and that means that we may not know the results on Election Day. And as we've been talking about and reporting, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the integrity of the vote. It's going to take a little while to count these ballots and do it securely, and the states are preparing for that. But this is something that some states want some legislation to be able to start processing those ballots a little bit earlier. And tracking your ballot is really important too. So some states allow it and some states don't. Again, on cbsnews.com/vote, you can find how your state tracks your ballot or doesn't. It is a great resource for states that have it, that have a barcode on your ballot that you can kind of follow it through the way you would an Amazon package, for example.
You know, Caitlin, so there's a concern about mail-in balloting because the results of the election may not be known on Election Day because of what some are saying could be a huge surge in mail-in voting. But it strikes me as I look at these lines that we just showed from Friday in Fairfax, Virginia, coupled with the fact that everybody is going out to restaurants, everybody is carrying on and having weddings and living their lives the way that they did before the pandemic, at least in the last couple of weeks of summer. Are we really to believe that people that can do that are not going to go and turn up at the ballot box? In other words, it's a good thing that these secretaries of state are being prepared for this influx, but could we be making a mountain out of a molehill given the behavior of people in the last couple of months with the pandemic, where they're sort of, in many instances, carrying on life as usual, and the fact that our doctors, Fauci and others, say that if you wear a mask and you socially distance, you can go on and do certain things that people wouldn't just vote the way that they always have.
It's such an important point, Vlad. And while I do think that we're going to see an unprecedented amount of mail-in voting, of absentee voting than we've ever seen before, I think we really have to prepare for in-person voting as well. And talking to experts over the past several months, that's what they've been telling me as well, that we need more resources. These states need more resources to be able to host all of these people who are going to be wanting to vote in person. Again, I've talked to people of all ages who just want to be voting in person because that's something that they have reliably done in the past. And of course, all of this information about mail-in voting that could prompt more people to just want to do it in person. And a really interesting thing that's happening in some of these states to help accommodate for that influx of people wanting to vote in person is that they're partnering with kind of unconventional things. So for example, some states are partnering with their local sports teams to have their local arenas, think of big stadiums and arenas as voting locations. Not only as voting locations, but also having the staff for these arenas be poll workers. That's another thing that you and I have talked a lot about the need to recruit poll workers to be there on Election Day in person, because a lot of poll workers tend to be older and may be more concerned about COVID and being in these large crowds. So those are all the efforts underway to make sure that voting in person is safe and secure, and to make sure that there aren't these long lines that are prohibitive and amount to voter suppression in a lot of places. So important point that we should keep reiterating.
Yeah, I mean, look, other than the times that I lived abroad, which was for many years when I voted absentee, I plan on voting in person. I mean, I wait in line at Trader Joe's outside and wear a mask, socially distance, run inside, do my business. I'm not like lollygagging. And then I'm guessing it's hopefully going to be the same when I decide to go vote this year. Let me ask you about this. The Washington Post reports that the former presidential candidate Mike Bloomberg and his team have raised $16 million to help cover the fees and fines for Floridians with felony convictions so they can vote. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, so this is a huge issue to pay attention to in Florida, the right to vote for those who have been incarcerated in the past. Remember in 2018, voters in the state overwhelmingly passed a constitutional amendment to allow former felons to be able to vote. That was an estimated 1.4 million people that would be able to vote. The governor, the Republican governor, intervened and signed a law that said that, okay, in order to vote, you have to pay off all your court fees and all your fines. That's really prohibitive for a lot of folks because those fines can amount to thousands and thousands of dollars. And also, just given how difficult it is to find a job with a felony conviction, people that we've talked to, we're actually reporting a story on this for our next episode of our voting rights series focused on this issue. This is a huge barrier to voting, and this is something that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court upheld that Florida law. So we've been talking to voters in Florida who may not be able to vote because they still have to pay off these fines. So that's going to be a really big issue to watch in some of these states. And a lot of voters that we've talked to, or potential voters, I should say, with these felony convictions, say that the right to vote is akin to kind of being able to be back into society and be a participant in democracy and have a voice in a lot of these things that are affecting them once they get out of prison. So this is a huge push by Bloomberg, and we'll see if that helps. We have a lot of other groups. There are a lot of other groups should say that we've been talking to that are working on this as well. But a big issue to pay attention to, especially in Florida.
Indeed. Caitlin, as always, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
For more information, as Caitlin said, on how to vote in your state, head to cbsnews.com/vote for a comprehensive guide. You will get answers to questions such as, how do I register? How to ensure my vote is counted? And what are my local deadlines? It's a great resource. Check it out.